The airport was busier than usual that morning, with people rushing in every direction, rolling bags behind them, checking screens, and lining up at counters. In the middle of all that movement walked Lena, a young girl holding tightly onto her travel backpack. Beside her was her guardian, a calm and gentle woman who had promised Lena that this trip would be something she remembered for a long time. Neither of them knew how true that promise would become. Lena loved airports. She loved the smell of coffee from the shops, the loud rolling of suitcase wheels, the voices echoing from every corner, and the giant airplanes she could spot through the huge glass windows. To her, airports felt like places where stories started, and this morning she felt excited. Even though it was early and she was still sleepy, her guardian checked their boarding passes. One more time while they waited in line. "You ready?" she asked Lena. Lena nodded. She liked sitting by the window. She always hoped she would get the row where she could see the wing clearly. She liked watching how small everything became when the plane took off. It made her think about life in different ways, even if she didn't always understand those thoughts completely. When their boarding group was called, Lena held her guardian's hand and walked toward the gate. The flight attendant scanning boarding passes smiled at her. "Have a good flight," she said, handing back the passes. Everything felt normal. Everything felt simple. Once inside the aircraft, Lena looked around with bright eyes. She liked the smell of the cold airplane air and the soft lights that glowed blue above the seats. People around them were still settling in, putting bags in overhead bins, adjusting their seats, removing jackets. Their row was a little further down. Lena walked ahead slightly, eager to spot the window seat with her number. But when she reached the row, her steps slowed. A man was sitting in her seat at first. She thought she read the numbers wrong. She checked her boarding pass again, then double-checked the small seat numbers above the row. No, she was in the right place. The man didn't even look up from his phone. He sat comfortably, too comfortably like he belonged there. Her guardian spoke first, gently. "Excuse me, sir. I think this seat belongs to her." The man finally glanced up, his face confused for a second before settling into something stubborn. "This is my seat," he said, holding up his own boarding pass. He didn't sound angry, but he didn't sound open to talking either. Her guardian stayed polite. "Maybe there's a mix-up." "Could I take a look?" she asked. The man hesitated, but eventually handed her the pass. She scanned it and frowned slightly. The seat number on his ticket was different from the one he was sitting in. "Your seat is a few rows ahead," she said kindly. "This one is for my niece." She showed him Lena's boarding pass, but instead of accepting it, he gave a small shrug. Someone must have switched them, or the system messed up. "I already sat down." Lena felt her heart squeeze a little. She didn't understand why he didn't want to move. It would only take a second. He had another seat waiting. But adults sometimes did things that didn't make sense to her. Her guardian kept her voice steady. "Sir, I understand, but this is her seat." The man sighed, as if he were the one being bothered. "I'm not getting up until someone explains this properly." He turned away and looked back at his phone. Passengers around them were beginning to glance over. Some looked annoyed by the delay. Others just seemed curious. Lena felt her cheeks warm. She didn't like being the center of attention for something she didn't even cause. A flight attendant approached. Noticing the stalled boarding. "Is everything okay here?" she asked. Her guardian explained gently. "He's in her seat, but he believes it's his." The flight attendant took both boarding passes and checked them quickly. She gave a short nod. "Yes, the window seat belongs to the child." She said it in a neutral tone, but she didn't ask the man to move. Instead, she looked at Lena and her guardian with a kind of cautious suspicion. The man leaned back in his seat, as if waiting for someone to take his side. The flight attendant turned to her colleagues for help. Another attendant came over, then another, and soon Lena and her guardian were surrounded by uniforms. Boarding passengers began squeezing past them, bumping into them as they rushed to find their seats. "Can we see your boarding passes again?" one attendant asked. "We've already checked them," her guardian said calmly. "This is our assigned seat." Still, the attendants kept checking. They whispered among themselves, looking confused for reasons Lena didn't understand. Why did they keep checking the same thing? It wasn't complicated. Can you step aside for a moment while we sort this out? One of them asked. Lena felt her stomach sink. But I didn't do anything, she whispered to her guardian. I know, her guardian said softly. It's okay. We'll wait. They moved to the galley area, pressed against the side wall. Passengers continued walking in, glancing at them. A few gave sympathetic looks. Others looked impatient. A couple looked judgmental, as if Lena had intentionally caused a problem. She looked down at her shoes, wishing she could become invisible. She felt small and confused. Why was it so hard for people to believe her? She didn't like that her seat had turned into a scene. The man in her seat watched from a distance. Satisfied that he didn't have to move yet, another flight attendant arrived. Wearing a badge that showed she was in a supervising position, she approached them with a serious expression. We're trying to understand the situation, she said. Her guardian nodded. The situation is simple. My niece's seat is taken, and we just want her to sit where she's assigned. The supervisor looked at Lena carefully, then at the boarding pass. Can you tell me your full name? He asked gently. Lena glanced up, unsure why her name mattered, but she answered quietly. When she said her last name, something changed in the man's expression. It was small, barely noticeable, but Lena saw it. His eyes lifted a little, his posture tightened, and his face shifted from strict professionalism to something like recognition. He repeated her last name slowly. Is that correct? He asked, almost as if he expected her to say no. Lena nodded. He looked at her guardian. And you're her guardian? Yes, she replied. The supervisor paused for a long moment and muttered, 1 moment, please, and hurried toward the front of the plane. Lena watched him go, her curiosity growing. She didn't know why her last name mattered to him. She didn't know what he was thinking. But she could tell he knew something she didn't. Her guardian placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. Don't worry. It will be sorted out. But Lena's thoughts were spiraling. Did she do something wrong? Did her name cause trouble? Why were people whispering and looking at them? More passengers squeezed past them, trying not to stare but failing. The plane was filling up fast, and the aisles were getting crowded. The overhead bins were closing with loud clicks. The air felt thick. The man in her seat had settled comfortably again, confident that he wouldn't be asked to move until the crew decided what to do. Lena rubbed her hands together nervously. She wanted everything to go back to normal. She wanted to sit beside the window. She wanted to look at the wing and watch the world shrink beneath her. And she wanted people to stop staring at her like she had caused this mess. Her guardian whispered, I'm proud of how patient you're being. But Lena didn't feel patient. She felt overwhelmed. Then she heard footsteps coming from the front of the aircraft. The supervisor had returned. He wasn't alone. Walking beside him was the captain. The captain's presence made the entire atmosphere change instantly. People straightened up in their seats. Passengers went quiet. The crew shifted out of the way. He walked with confidence, but not arrogance. His face wasn't stern. It was focused, calm, and observant. When his eyes landed on Lena, they softened. He approached her slowly, kneeling slightly so she didn't have to look up too far to meet his eyes. You're Lena? He asked. She nodded, her heart beating a little faster. The captain exchanged a brief look with the supervisor, then turned back to the young girl. Can you tell me your last name again? He asked kindly. She repeated it. The captain paused, as if a memory from years ago suddenly came back to him. Then he breathed out slowly and said, I knew someone with that name. Someone very important. His voice dropped lower. Someone who made a difference. Lena blinked. She didn't know what he meant. Her guardian looked surprised too, her eyebrows lifting slightly. The captain spoke again, his tone gentle but full of meaning. I think I owe you an apology for the trouble you've had to deal with. The flight attendants looked confused, unsure what he meant. The man in Lena's seat sat up a little straighter. Finally alert. The captain stood up slowly, and the energy in the cabin shifted again. He was about to change everything. And Lena, who had started the flight feeling invisible and misunderstood, suddenly found herself at the center of something she didn't yet understand. but could already feel was important. The cabin felt strangely quiet after the captain approached Lena. Even though people were still talking, settling in, and placing their things away, there was a shift in the air. Something subtle but strong enough that Lena felt it. She didn't know why the captain knew her last name, but the way he looked at her made her feel like he understood something no one else did. Her guardian stood close behind her, watching carefully. She didn't want to interrupt or rush anything. She could sense this moment meant more than either of them had expected. The captain gave Lena a small, warm smile. It wasn't a smile adults use to calm a child. It was different. It felt real, thoughtful. He took a slow breath as if organizing his thoughts. "I worked with someone who shared your last name," he said quietly, careful not to speak too loudly in front of listening ears. "Someone I respected very much." Lena felt something stir in her chest. Her father's name had been spoken in important spaces before, but she didn't expect it to matter here. In the middle of an airplane surrounded by strangers, the supervising crew member who had brought the captain stood slightly behind him, now watching Lena with a gentler expression. He no longer looked suspicious or strict. Something had shifted inside him too. The captain straightened and glanced at the attendants who were gathered nearby. "Let me take care of this," he said. His voice stayed calm, but there was firm authority in it. Immediately, the attendants stepped aside to give him space. Lena's guardian looked at her and whispered softly, "It's going to be okay." But this time, her voice carried something else: curiosity. Mixed with relief, the captain walked toward the row where the man still sat in Lena's seat. The man looked uneasy now, as if he realized things had taken a turn he did not expect. "Sir," the captain began politely, "there has been a misunderstanding. This seat belongs to the young passenger, as shown on her boarding pass. I'll need you to move to your assigned seat now." The man blinked, his face stiffening. "Well, I thought." He didn't finish the sentence. He looked down at his boarding pass, then back up at the captain. "I understand," the captain said gently. "But we need to keep boarding moving smoothly. Please gather your things." His tone stayed respectful, but no one could mistake the authority underneath. The man finally stood up, embarrassed. He grabbed his jacket and his bag without meeting anyone's eyes. When he stepped aside, Lena felt her breath loosen. She hadn't realized how tightly she'd been holding it. Passengers nearby tried not to stare, but their heads tilted, their eyes filled with curiosity. Everyone sensed something unusual had happened. The captain stepped back toward Lena and her guardian. He motioned for them to follow him. "Come on," he said softly. "Let's get you seated." Lena took a careful step forward, still unsure. Her guardian put a hand on her shoulder and guided her. When they reached the row, the captain waited patiently for them to settle. Lena slid into the window seat, finally where she belonged. She pressed her hand against the cool plastic edge of the window, feeling a soft wave of relief. She didn't look outside yet. She didn't want to miss what the captain might say next. Her guardian sat down beside her, letting out a small sigh that showed how long she'd been trying to stay calm. The captain leaned slightly closer, keeping his voice low enough that only the two of them could hear. "Your father was part of something important," he said. "Something I will never forget." Lena felt her heart beat faster. She had heard a few stories from her family, but they never went into too much detail. Sometimes adults avoided talking about the past when they feared it might make children sad. But Lena had always wanted to know more. Many years ago, there was an emergency aboard a small aircraft. A situation most people would panic in, the captain continued softly. But your father didn't panic. He stepped in at the right moment. He wasn't flying the aircraft. He wasn't even required to help, but he did. And his actions saved lives. His eyes softened further. "I was one of the people he helped that day." Lena's breath caught in her throat. Her guardian suddenly covered her mouth with her hand as she tried to hold back emotion. The captain gave a gentle nod. "When I heard your last name, I remembered immediately. It isn't a name you forget. I want you to know that you are welcome on this flight, not because of what happened back then, because you belong here, and you always did." He paused. "I'm sorry for the confusion and the stress it caused you." Lena didn't know what to say. Her lips parted, but no words came. The captain didn't push her. He simply gave her a soft smile and stepped back. The supervising crew member approached him quietly. "Captain, we're almost ready to close the cabin," he said. "Understood," the captain replied. He turned back to Lena one more time. "If you need anything at all during the flight, you let them know," he said, gesturing toward the attendants. But he wasn't speaking like someone giving a rule. He spoke like someone offering protection. The captain headed back toward the cockpit, and passengers returned to their conversations. Lena watched him walk away, her mind full of questions she didn't know how to ask. Her guardian leaned closer. "I didn't know the captain was there that day," she whispered. "I didn't know your father helped him personally." Lena stared at the window now, but she didn't really see anything. Her eyes focused on the wing, but her thoughts drifted far away. She felt a mix of emotions, pride, sadness, confusion, and a tiny spark of something warm she couldn't name. Passengers continued boarding. Some looked at Lena with curious eyes, but also kinder expressions now. A few offered small smiles, as if to say they were glad things were resolved. One of the flight attendants, the one who had been the most hesitant earlier, came back to their row. Her tone was different this time. "I want to apologize," she said. "We didn't handle things the way we should have. Thank you for your patience." Lena nodded, unsure how to react. Her guardian replied politely, "Thank you for saying that. It means a lot." The attendant placed a small packet of cookies on the tray table. "These are for you," she said to Lena. "Just a little something." She didn't wait for a response. She walked away quickly, but her expression had softened. Lena looked down at the cookies. She didn't open them yet. She held them in her hands for a moment, as if trying to understand why things had changed so suddenly. The aircraft doors finally shut with a muted thud. The captain's voice came through the speakers. "Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for your patience during boarding. We'll be departing shortly. Please fasten your seatbelts and prepare for takeoff." His voice sounded steady, but there was a hint of warmth that hadn't been there before. As the engines began to hum, Lena's guardian moved closer again. "Your father would be proud of you," she whispered. Lena blinked rapidly, trying not to let tears fall. She didn't want anyone to think she was sad or overwhelmed. She just felt full of emotions she had carried quietly for a long time. She looked at the wing through the window. The ground crew moved around below, guiding vehicles, checking equipment, lifting the safety cones. Everything looked small and busy. Everything looked important. "Why didn't you tell me that story before?" Lena finally whispered. Her guardian sighed softly. "I wanted to, many times. But it's hard to tell a child heavy stories. I didn't want you to grow up with sadness. I wanted you to grow up with love." "But it's not sad," Lena said. "I feel proud." Her guardian smiled gently. "Then I'm glad the captain told you." As the engines grew louder, Lena pressed her fingers lightly against the window. She watched the runway slowly begin to move as the plane pushed back. For the first time since the confusion began, she felt safe. But she also felt something else, a quiet strength forming inside her. Something she hadn't felt before. People around her no longer whispered doubts. They weren't staring in the same way. They weren't questioning her place. She belonged here. The plane began to taxi, rolling steadily toward the runway. The captain's voice came over the speakers again, giving instructions. But Lena wasn't listening to the words. She was thinking about her father, about the calm bravery the captain had described. She wondered what he would think if he saw her now. The plane slowed for a moment as it reached the end of the runway. Lena held her breath. Her guardian squeezed her hand, the engines roared, and the aircraft surged forward as the wheels lifted off the ground. Lena watched the world grow smaller beneath her, just the way she always liked. And this time, the sky felt different. It felt like her father was somewhere in it, watching over her, guiding her upward, just like he had guided others long ago. The plane continued rising into the sky, and Lena watched the city shrink beneath the wings. She always liked watching the world grow smaller, but this time felt different. Everything looked softer, quieter, almost peaceful. But inside her, thoughts were running in so many directions she could barely keep up. Her guardian glanced at her, studying her face as the plane leveled out above the clouds. "How are you feeling?" she asked gently. Lena shrugged a little. "I don't know," she said honestly. It feels strange. Strange how? Lena hugged her backpack to her chest before answering. When the captain talked about my father, it was like he knew him better than I did. And I don't know if that feels good or bad. Her guardian's eyes softened. You knew him in a different way. You were very young. But the people he helped, they remember him for what he did, not just who he was. Lena looked out the window again. The clouds below looked like fluffy mountains. She traced a finger lightly along the small round edge of the window. I just didn't expect any of this, she whispered. Her guardian gave a small smile. Neither did I. They fell quiet for a moment, listening to the soft hum of the engines. Passengers around them were settling into their own routines, reading, talking quietly, adjusting their seats. Some still glanced in Lena's direction, but the looks had changed. They weren't annoyed or suspicious anymore. They were warm, almost supportive. A few minutes later, a different flight attendant approached, one they hadn't spoken to yet. She had a calm face and a gentle way of walking, as if she didn't want to disturb anyone. Hello, she said softly, leaning slightly toward them. The captain asked me to check on you both. Is everything okay now? Her guardian nodded. Thank you. Yes, everything's fine. Good, if you need anything at all, just press the call button. We'll be happy to help. Lena nodded politely, and the attendant walked away. It was strange to see how different everyone treated them now. Moments ago, she felt like they were being doubted. Now people were looking at them with kindness. As the plane continued forward, a soft announcement played over the speakers. Ladies and gentlemen, we have reached our cruising altitude. You may now use approved electronic devices. The voice was clear and even. Lena closed her eyes for a moment, letting the steadiness of the flight calm her. She didn't know what part of the story her father had played in the captain's life, but she could feel it was something important, something that stayed with the captain even after many years. After a few minutes, her guardian reached into her bag and pulled out a small snack. Here, she said softly, offering it to Lena. Eat something. It'll help clear your mind. Lena took it, but didn't open it right away. She kept turning it in her hands. Do you think the captain will tell us more? She asked. Maybe, her guardian said. He seemed like he wanted to. But even if he doesn't, you can ask him after the flight if you're comfortable. He seems like the kind of person who would give you an honest answer. Lena nodded slowly. The clouds outside were glowing with sunlight. The sky looked endless, stretching farther than she could imagine. It made her feel small, but also connected to something bigger. She swallowed hard. Why do you think people didn't believe me about the seat? She asked quietly. Her guardian let out a long breath. Sometimes people make quick assumptions. Sometimes they get stressed and forget to slow down and think. She paused. It wasn't your fault, but it felt like it was, Lena whispered. Everyone was staring, and the flight attendant kept checking. The same thing over and over, like she thought we were lying. Her guardian gently squeezed her hand. I know, but you handled it with so much patience. You didn't raise your voice. You didn't panic. You didn't get angry, even when you had every right to. That's something to be proud of. Lena pressed her lips together, trying to believe that. After a moment, her guardian added, and now look at what happened. Without you trying to prove anything, the truth showed up on its own. That's a powerful thing. Lena nodded. She wanted to believe that part too. The plane gently bumped through. A patch of light turbulence, and Lena gripped her seat for a second. Her guardian rested a calm hand on her arm. The bumps passed quickly. As things smoothed out again, a soft voice spoke from behind them. Excuse me, Lena? And her guardian both turned. A woman from the row behind them leaned forward slightly. She looked kind, with soft eyes and a small smile. I just wanted to say, the woman began quietly, you handled everything so well earlier. Most adults wouldn't have stayed as calm as you did. Lena blinked, surprised. She hadn't expected a stranger to say something like that. Thank you, she said shyly. The woman nodded. And your father, he must have been a remarkable person. The captain looked truly moved when he spoke to you. I could see it even from back here. She offered a warm smile. You should feel proud. Lena felt a small, unexpected warmth spread in her chest. I do, she whispered. The woman nodded again and returned to her seat. Giving Lena a little more space, her guardian touched her shoulder gently. See, people see your strength even when you don't. Lena didn't answer, but she felt the truth in those words. The flight went on quietly. The seatbelt signs turned off. People moved around, stretching, chatting, ordering drinks. The earlier confusion had faded into something softer, a memory that still existed, but didn't feel heavy anymore. About 20 minutes later, another small moment surprised Lena. The supervising crew member approached their row again. He stood respectfully, folding his hands in front of him. May I speak with you both for a moment? He asked politely. Her guardian nodded. Of course, he crouched slightly to be at eye level with Lena. I wanted to personally apologize for the stress earlier, he said sincerely. We should have handled the situation better. We should have listened sooner. Lena lowered her eyes, unsure how to respond. But the supervisor continued. Your father was someone I studied in training. It's not in great detail, but as part of a case study. I didn't realize until I heard your name. He helped save a small aircraft in distress many years ago. What he did required clarity, bravery, and incredible self-control. Hearing that you're his daughter? Well, it meant a lot to me. He paused, then added gently, and it makes sense. You have his calmness. Lena felt her throat tighten. She looked away quickly, blinking hard. Her guardian placed a steady hand on her back. The supervisor stood up again. If you need anything during the flight, he said softly, you come to me. Lena nodded. He gave a respectful nod and walked away. Lena stared at her hands for a moment. They felt warm, slightly shaky, but also steady in a way she didn't understand. Her guardian leaned toward her. Your father was proud of who he was, she said, and now you're hearing from people he helped. That's a gift, Lena. Not everyone gets to know the impact their parents made. Lena whispered, I miss him. It came out small, almost fragile. Her guardian squeezed her hand gently. I know, but moments like these, they show he's still here in some way. Through people, through memories, and through you. Lena rested her head on her guardian's shoulder. She stayed that way for several minutes while the plane hummed around them. Another soft bump of turbulence passed under them, but she didn't tense this time. The sky outside glowed with warm sunlight, and the clouds stretched endlessly as she watched them drift by. She thought about everything that had happened, how quickly things had gone wrong, and how even more quickly they had changed. She thought of the captain's eyes when he remembered her father. She thought of the passengers who had apologized. She thought of the seat that caused all this trouble, and slowly, something inside her shifted. She no longer felt embarrassed about what happened. She no longer felt like she caused a problem. She felt strong, a little more grown than she had been that morning. The captain came over the speakers again, giving a soft update about the weather and the arrival time. His voice was steady and warm, and Lena listened in a different way now. She knew his kindness was real. She knew he cared, and she knew that when the plane landed, something important was waiting. Not just the end of the flight, but a moment she would carry for the rest of her life. For now, though, she leaned closer to the window, watching the sunlight dance on the clouds, feeling the quiet presence of her father somewhere in the sky around her. The moment the captain stepped back into the cockpit, the air in the cabin settled a little, but the tension in Lena's chest did not. She sat quietly now, finally in the seat that was hers from the start. Yet her thoughts kept drifting back to the confusion and the sense of being watched. Even though things had calmed on the outside, her mind was still racing. Her guardian sat beside her, leaning slightly toward the window, as if trying to shield her from the remaining whispers. He gave her a small nod, the kind that said everything without needing words. It was a silent way of telling her that she did well, that she handled everything exactly right. Even if she didn't feel so sure, passengers around them were still glancing over now and then. Some looked curious, others seemed uncomfortable, maybe even guilty for assuming things earlier. The man who had refused to leave her seat earlier was now sitting stiffly a few rows down, keeping his eyes trained on the seat back in front of him, as if avoiding any acknowledgement. No one spoke to him, and he didn't speak to anyone. He only shifted in his seat every now and then, the small movements betraying the embarrassment he carried. The new flight attendant who had joined after the supervisor stepped in passed by to check seatbelts before takeoff. She paused when she reached Lena's row, giving a soft and careful smile. It wasn't the forced kind people made when trying to hide discomfort. It felt real. "Are you two all settled now?" she asked gently. Lena nodded. "Yes, thank you." The attendant placed a hand on the headrest in front of them and leaned closer, lowering her voice. "If you need anything," she said, "just let me know. I mean anything at all." Her guardian thanked her, and the attendant moved on. Lena watched her step down the aisle, noticing how she checked on every row with a calmer, more attentive presence than the first attendant. Soon the engines began. Their soft rumble, the familiar vibration that signaled they were moments away from takeoff. Lena gripped the armrest lightly as the plane started to roll forward. Her guardian looked at her again, this time with a small smile that helped ease her nerves. As the plane lifted into the air, Lena looked out the window, watching the houses shrink beneath the clouds. The city was fading, becoming nothing more than patterns and outlines. She loved this part, the way something so huge could suddenly look tiny from above. It reminded her that problems sometimes felt bigger than they actually were. Yet this time, the view didn't bring her the usual excitement. Not right away. She thought about the way the supervisor had reacted when he heard her last name, the shift in his tone, the way he suddenly went from questioning her to stepping away quickly, almost urgently. It still made her wonder why. She knew her father's name carried weight. She had grown up hearing stories about him, though not many. Most of them were told quietly, like memories being handled with care. Her guardian often shared little things, moments her father had lived through, choices he made that helped people. But those stories were usually told at home, not in public, certainly never in a place like an airplane. She wondered whether the captain had known her father long ago, or whether he only knew of him someone whose reputation had reached far beyond their family. Maybe he had worked with him at some point. Maybe he had been inspired by something her father had done. Lena wasn't sure. But she knew one thing. The way the captain had spoken to her had felt sincere. Her guardian sensed she was thinking deeply. "You're quiet," he said. "I'm just thinking," she replied. "About earlier." She nodded. He turned slightly toward her, lowering his voice. "People don't always understand what they see at first. Sometimes they react before thinking. But what matters is how things end, not how they start." Lena let his words sink in. She knew he was right. Still, she couldn't shake off the strange mix of emotions: embarrassment, confusion, and something else she couldn't quite name. After some time, the captain's voice came over the speaker. His announcement was calm, steady, professional. But when he finished the standard information about flight duration and weather, he paused. "And to our young passenger in seat 14A, he added, "Thank you for your patience. We're glad to have you on board today." The cabin went quiet. Passengers looked around, searching for who he was talking about, and their eyes eventually landed on Lena. Some faces softened. Others looked surprised. A few looked ashamed. Her cheeks warmed, but not from embarrassment this time. It felt different, like she was being seen, really seen, not questioned. Her guardian looked at her with a small, proud smile. "Looks like someone made an impression," he said. Lena didn't know what to say. She just leaned back in her seat, letting the moment wash over her. Not long after, the new flight attendant returned with 2 small cups of orange juice. "These are from the captain," she said, placing them gently on their tray tables. "He wanted to make sure you both are comfortable." Lena smiled. "Thank you." Once the attendant walked away, Lena looked at her guardian. "Do you think the captain really knew him?" He nodded slowly. "Yes, I think he did." "Did you know the captain?" "Not personally." "At your father?" "He crossed paths with many people. People who never forgot him." Lena looked down at her hands. "I miss him. I know," he said softly. "I miss him too." There was a quiet moment between them, one filled with understanding instead of sadness. It wasn't about loss this time. It was about the mark someone leaves behind, even long after they're gone. For a while, she watched the clouds drift below the plane. The smooth white shapes looked almost like they were standing still. Even though the plane was cutting through the sky at high speed, a soft voice startled her thoughts. "Excuse me," a woman from across the aisle said gently. "I just wanted to say, I'm sorry for what happened earlier. I think we all judged before knowing anything." Lena looked up at her. The woman's face showed honest regret. "It's okay," Lena said, offering a small, polite smile. The woman nodded and sat back down, visibly relieved. A few minutes later, an older man leaned slightly over the aisle. "You handled everything very bravely," he told her, more calmly than many adults would have. Lena didn't know how to respond, so she simply said, "Thank you." Her guardian glanced at her with a warm expression. "See," he whispered, "people learn when they're shown something true." She thought about that as the flight continued, how quickly people could shift from doubt to respect once they realized they were wrong. It didn't erase what had happened, but it did change how she felt about it. The captain made another walk through the cabin later, checking on passengers. When he reached Lena's row, he stopped beside her. "Doing okay?" he asked. She nodded. "Yes, thank you for earlier. You don't have to thank me," he replied gently. "Your father meant a lot to many of us." Seeing his name again, it reminded me of why I became who I am today. Lena blinked, surprised. "Really?" "Yes," the captain said. "He inspired more people than you know." Her guardian looked at the captain with a thoughtful expression. "She'd like to hear more, I'm sure." The captain smiled. "When we land, if you'd like, I can show you the cockpit and tell you a little about the time I met him." "It's the least I can do." Lena's eyes brightened. "I'd like that." "Good," he said, giving a soft nod before continuing down the aisle. When he was out of sight, Lena leaned back again, but now her thoughts felt lighter. The confusion from earlier still lingered, but it no longer weighed on her. The embarrassment had faded. The tension had disappeared. What remained was something unexpected - pride. She didn't know how the rest of the flight would go, or what story the captain would share later, but she knew one thing for certain. What started as a mistake had turned into something she would remember for the rest of her life. She closed her eyes for a moment, letting the steady hum of the engine surround her. She felt a sense of peace slowly returning. Maybe the day hadn't gone the way she expected, but maybe it had led exactly where it needed to, and high above the clouds, with the world stretched out far below. Lena finally felt the heaviness lift, replaced with the quiet strength of knowing who she was, and the legacy she carried with her. The rest of the flight seemed to move gently, almost as if the sky itself wanted to make up for how the day had started. Lena sat quietly, watching the soft layers of clouds outside her window. They looked almost like mountains made of cotton. Every now and then, her guardian glanced at her, just to make sure she was all right. She always answered with a small nod or a calm smile, though her thoughts were drifting far deeper than her expression showed. She replayed the earlier moments. Again and again, the questions, the confusion, the way everyone had stared at her, the awkward silence, the captain's voice calling her seat number with warmth rather than suspicion. It was strange how quickly things had changed. A few hours ago, she had been standing in the aisle wondering if she had done something wrong. Now, she was sitting in her rightful seat with people treating her differently, as if they finally saw her clearly. Her guardian placed a hand on the armrest. "You doing okay?" She nodded. "Yes, it feels better now." He gave a soft smile. "Good. You handled everything with more calm than many grown-ups would have." Lena looked down at her hands. "I didn't feel calm." "That's the funny thing about courage," he said. "Sometimes it doesn't feel like courage at all. It just feels like trying your best." The plane floated smoothly across the sky. The air was calm, and the clouds thinned as they neared their destination. The hum of the engines blended with soft conversations around the cabin. People seemed more relaxed than before, but many still glanced at Lena from time to time, not with suspicion now, but with a quiet sort of respect. A young man seated on the opposite side of the aisle leaned over slightly and spoke in a low, friendly voice. "Hey, hope you're having a better flight now." His tone was gentle, apologetic without saying the word. Lena smiled politely. "Yes, thank you." He nodded, then pulled back, giving her space. It wasn't much, but even small gestures meant something. About an hour before landing, the captain walked down the aisle again. People straightened up a little when he passed, as if they were suddenly aware of his importance. He stopped beside Lena's row once more. "How are we doing here?" he asked. "We're okay," her guardian answered. The captain turned his attention to Lena. And you? Ready for a smooth landing? She nodded. Yes. He smiled gently. Good, when we get on the ground, I'll be waiting for you both up front. I meant what I said earlier. I'd like to show you something. Lena felt her pulse quicken with curiosity. Okay. After he walked away, she leaned closer to her guardian. Do you think he's really going to show me the cockpit? I think he is, he replied. And I think he wants to tell you something important. She wasn't sure what that meant, but she held on to the thought as the flight continued. As they descended through the clouds, the light inside the cabin shifted. Shadows moved gently across the seats. People began putting away their belongings. The new flight attendant passed through one last time, checking seat belts and offering reassuring smiles. The plane touched down with a soft bump. Wheels gliding smoothly across the runway. A few passengers clapped, not loudly, but enough to make a ripple through the cabin. Lena felt the tension she had been holding finally release. When the plane slowed and rolled toward the gate, the captain's voice came through the speakers again. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome. We hope you had a pleasant flight. And to our young passenger in 1 for 8th, thank you once again. The passengers looked toward Lena one more time. This time, she didn't feel nervous. She didn't shrink or look away. She sat a little taller. Once the doors opened, people began gathering their bags. Some paused by Lena's row as they passed. A woman with kind eyes said quietly, "You were very patient today." A man with a briefcase added, "Your father would be proud." Lena pressed her lips together, trying not to let emotion rise too high. She simply nodded. When most passengers had left, the flight attendant appeared. "The captain is waiting for you," she said, her voice warm. Lena and her guardian walked slowly toward the front of the plane. The aisle felt longer now, quieter, almost like walking through a hallway of memories rather than a small aircraft cabin. The captain stood just outside the cockpit door. Headset resting around his neck, sleeves rolled neatly at his wrists. His expression was calm, but his eyes carried something deeper, a mixture of respect and remembrance. "I'm glad you could come," he said as they approached. He stepped aside and motioned for them to enter the cockpit. Lena's eyes widened. She had seen photos of airplane controls before, but standing here, surrounded by hundreds of glowing buttons and screens, felt unreal. The world outside the windows looked bright and sharp, runway lines stretching into the distance. The captain waited until she had taken it all in before he spoke. "I want to tell you something about your father," he said. Lena turned toward him, her heart beating faster. "I met him years ago," the captain continued. "Not on a plane on the ground. Different circumstances. He helped someone very important to me. Someone in my family. I never forgot what he did. People like him leave a mark that doesn't fade." Lena felt her chest tighten, not with pain, but with a heavy warmth that came from hearing her father spoken of with such truth. "He once told me something," the captain said, looking toward the window. "He said that kindness should always come before assumptions. He believed that understanding a person mattered more than judging them." He looked back at Lena. Today reminded me of that. Her guardian stood quietly beside her, his expression thoughtful. The captain crouched down slightly so he was closer to Lena's height. "Your last name carries history, not because of fame, but because of character. Remember that. And don't let moments like earlier make you forget who you are." Lena swallowed, her voice barely above a whisper. "Thank you," smiled, stood up straight again, and reached over to flip a small harmless switch on the panel. The screens flickered slightly, lighting up in different shades. "Would you like to sit in the captain's seat?" he asked. Her guardian looked at her with raised eyebrows, as if encouraging her. Lena stepped carefully toward the seat and sat down. Her legs felt small beneath the large controls, but she felt a deep sense of pride. The captain showed her a few buttons, not ones that controlled anything important, but ones that lit up softly when pressed. "These are for display," he said, "but they give you a small idea of how everything works." Lena smiled, her fingers grazing the smooth surface of the dashboard. After spending a few minutes inside the cockpit, they stepped back out. Captain walked them down the jet bridge, refusing to let them leave without one last word. "You remind me of him," he said to Lena. "Not because of your name, but because of how you handled everything today. Quiet strength is sometimes the strongest kind. Lena's guardian placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. She has a lot of that, he said. The captain nodded. I can see it. He shook her guardian's hand, then looked at Lena one more time. Take care of yourself. And remember, your story is only just beginning. As they walked toward the terminal, Lena felt something shift inside her. It was as if the confusion and embarrassment from earlier had been replaced by a sense of belonging she couldn't quite explain. She carried her small backpack, but she carried something else too, a feeling of connection to her father, stronger than it had been when the day began. When they reached the baggage claim area, her guardian looked at her. How do you feel? She thought about it for a moment before answering. Different, but in a good way. He nodded. You should. She didn't say anything else. She didn't need to. A quiet smile grew on her face as they walked through the airport together. The day had started with doubt, but it ended with something far more powerful. Understanding, respect, and a memory she would carry for the rest of her life. And as she stepped outside into the fresh air, she felt taller than she had that morning, as if the sky had given some of its space back to her. The world seemed bigger, brighter, and full of possibility. Her identity hadn't just turned the situation upside down. It had turned her whole day into something unforgettable.